In this video, we're going to talk about how we can create our own observables, how we can subscribe to them, how we can unsubscribe to them, how our observables can clean up after themselves, and so on. So this is an important video. I want to make a quick note, however. The RxJS version 5, that's in beta right now, the one that I recommend people use, it conforms to the JavaScript, the proposed ECMA script observable API. So the stuff I'm going to show you guys in this video is stuff that will actually be standard JavaScript pretty soon here. I don't know when the proposal is going to make it through, but it does conform to that proposal. So again, that's another reason why I recommend using RxJS version 5. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and start my watch task. I'm going to say go watch scripts, and that'll go ahead and start. And then over here on my source server, we're going to be working in Node in this example so that I get a tight feedback loop in my console. So I'm going to right-click source server, and I'm going to create example underscore o1 underscore observables.js. And then over here, I'm going to run it with nodemon. So I'm going to say npm start nodemon, and I'm going to say build / example o1 observables, and hit enter. npm run. Not npm start. npm start runs the npm start task, not any arbitrary task. Anyway, let's go ahead and make sure it's working. So I'll say console log, hey, blah, blah, blah. And indeed, when I refresh, we do get that outputted. Okay, so I can hide that, and we can get a little bit more room to play around with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import capital RX from RxJS Rx. This is a video that I do kind of, most of these I do kind of encourage people to follow along with to kind of get the you know, kind of solidify the keystrokes, so to speak. But before we go ahead and create our first observable, I just want to quickly point out promises, because the syntax is very similar. So if I say const promise equals new promise, we pass in a function that takes in a resolve and a reject method. And then we say promise resolve hey. I could also do a console log here and say console log in promise. And then I can also say promise.then item console log item. And if I hit save, notice that we get in promise. And it's not promise resolve hey, it's simply resolve hey. And we get hey. So that's a promise. We have a generator function that can resolve or reject. Another interesting thing, though, if we don't subscribe to the promise, it still executes. So it's not lazy. It's eager. It'll always execute. Now let's create an observable. The syntax will look very, very similar. If I say const, let's say simple money, I'm using money at the end to signify that this object is an observable. I use that convention frequently, or all the time, rather. Equals new rx dot observable. Now it takes in a function too, just like promise does, but it takes in an object. It doesn't take in two functions, or the function that we pass in doesn't take in two functions. It takes in an object. It takes in a function that takes in an object called observer, or really whatever you want. And that's it. That's a simple observable that, well, doesn't really do anything. So let's go ahead and fill this up with some example code. I'm going to say console log generating observable. Then I'm going to say just set timeout at 1 second. And I'm going to say observer.next and item observer.next. Well, actually, I can make this more interesting. I do another set timeout here for a second. And then I can say observer.next, another item. And then I can say observer.complete. So, a couple interesting things to note. We do pass in a function, a generator function that gets called to create the observable. And then we invoke the next method on it, or the complete method, or the error method. We'll see that in a moment. Notice how that I can call the next method, because I've created these closures, I can call it from within other methods. So such as set timeout, I can wait a second before calling next. And that's it. That's as simple as it is to create an observable. But you'll notice that I did save, and I'll do it again just to prove it to you guys. If I save it again, you notice it is running it, starting blah, 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 but that says clean exit. We don't get any output. Our console log generating observable doesn't get fired. So what is going on here? Now, this is very, very, very important. Observables are lazy. They do not run your generator function until they have a subscription. So that's big thing, a very, very big thing to understand about working with reactive programming, or specifically Reactive.js. So let's create a subscription. Remember, a subscription is the thing that actually does something with the data. And it makes sense why observables are lazy. I mean, think about it. A subscription is the thing that causes side effects. It prints out messages to the console. It adds DOM elements to our HTML page. It shows an alert dialog box. It causes the side effects. So if we don't have any side effects to cause, why are we executing the observable? So it makes sense why it's lazy. So let's subscribe to it. So I'm going to say subscribe. Now, simple.subscribe takes, there's two ways to call it. And I'll show you guys both ways. The first way, I'll show you guys the most common way to do it. The most common way to invoke subscribe is to pass in three functions. The first function is the next function. So the first function maps to whatever .next is. So we'll simply say console log one.next item. The second method takes in is the error callback. So we'll go error goes into console log one.error. The third is the onComplete callback, console log one.complete. So a couple things to note. First of all, as you saw before, none of these are required, well, except for the next, obviously, otherwise what are you doing? But you don't have to pass in the error or the complete, or you can skip the next two by just passing in null or undefined or whatever and just have the error and complete, or just the error or just the complete if you want. So remember, this is next, this is error, and this is complete. And they map to whatever this object is right here, this object that calls next and complete and so on. And I'll save it out. And notice how it says, now it finally says generating observable. Then we do one.next, one.next, and then one.complete. If you didn't see that, you'll notice there's a delay between generating in the first item and the first item and the second item. And once the second item goes through, the complete method is called. So that is subscriptions. So let's talk about multiple subscriptions for a sec. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to say set timeout. And I'm going to say do this after 3 seconds. And then I'm going to say simple.subscribe. I'm going to create another subscription to simple. But now I'm going to use a different syntax. I'm going to use, remember, there's two ways to call subscribe. The first way takes in all three functions as sequential parameters. The second one takes in an object with all three functions defined on that object. So I can say next item, or I can just say next item goes into console log to next item. And then I can say error. I can define this also like this. Error, console log 2.error. Whoops, I want to print out that error too. So 2.error, error. And then we can also use, I mean, whatever syntax you really want. We can also say complete is function console log 2.complete. All three of these things practically do the same thing. I want to point out that you can use any three of these syntaxes to make this happen. The only difference is this one will hoist in the current context, if you're familiar with arrow functions. But all three of these syntaxes are identical for our purposes here. I just wanted to show the three different ways you can define a function within an object. But the point is we're passing in an object that takes in the next error and that has the next error and complete function on it. So let's go ahead and run that example again. So we get generating observable, an item, another item, one.complete. Then we get another generating observable, and that's so important. So you'll notice that each time we subscribe to this observable, it reruns the generator function. Now, this behavior is incredibly important when working with reactive programming. That's how we can do things like requery a web API or retry a web API call if it failed, for example, because by resubscribing to that observable, that API call will happen again. Now, there are ways to make it so that our observable won't be generated more than once. And we'll talk about that when we have a discussion about hot versus cold observables. But for now, for all intents and purposes, an observable is simply a generator function that accepts an observer and invokes the next or complete methods on it. Let's create an error observable. Const error equals new Rx observable. Error goes into, and we're simply going to say, or whoops, not error, observer. We're simply going to say observer.error new error whoa. And now if we came over here to our simple.subscribe and changed it to error.subscribe and hit Control S, we get one.error, error is whoa. Now, for our error, we don't necessarily have to pass in a new error object. We can really pass in whatever we want. We could pass in an object, whoa is bleh. So one.error, and then it's getting an object back, right? But I like passing in, depending on what I'm doing, passing in a new error is really cool. So the reason that this is really cool is when I print my error and it's of type error, I can say error.stack. And by doing error.stack, look at the error message we get. We actually get a stack trace to where the error actually happened. So that's the benefit for instantiate when you throw an error in an observable. I highly recommend you instantiate an actual error object so you get a capture of the stack trace and you can identify where it came from if there was a programming error. All right, so that's part one. So I'm just going to say part one, and then I'm just going to comment all this out. So if you want to take a look at the code for a second, I highly recommend you type this in. Get this into muscle memory. But that's up to you. And I'll just comment the rest out. Now let's move on to part two. So part two, I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to go ahead and say const interval money equals new rx.observable observer. And we're going to say, well, actually, I can make this even more interesting. I can say function create interval. And interval will take in a time, and it'll return a new rx.observable observer. And we'll simply say set interval time. And outside of the set interval, I'll say let index equals 0. And then I'll simply say observer.next index plus plus. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a helper method that I'm going to be copying and pasting through a lot of these examples. I'm going to say function create subscription or subscriber tag. And this will simply return a new object with next item is simply console log tag dot next item. Error is simply going to be console log, and this will be tag dot error. And for this, I'm going to do error dot stack or error, and then complete, which will be console log tag dot complete. So this just creates a simple subscriber that'll print everything out with the tag, and we're going to copy and paste this around our examples to create subscribers that are just really simple and easy to work with. So now I can say const every second equals create interval 1000, and I can say every second dot subscribe create subscriber 1. Now I can hit Control S, and notice how we get one.next, and this will just go on forever and ever. Now there are going to be operators that we can apply to only take X amount of items. Furthermore, we don't have any sort of way for our create interval to go in and cancel the interval once the subscription is over with. And we also haven't talked about how we can dispose subscriptions. But we're going to do that in the next video. So we'll see you guys then.